All right, let's get started. Welcome again, everybody. Thank you so much for joining and taking the time this afternoon, wherever you are in part of the country. I'm in California, so I'm going to say good afternoon. Thank you for joining us in our three-part learning series, which is today's our last series, but we do have some additional follow-up information we're going to share with you in a second. My name is Angela Castellanos, and I'm the School Mental Health Specialist for the Pacific Southwest Mental Health Technology Transfer Center Network. Can't say that fast, right? It's also known as the MHTTC. You know, we want this experience to be as interactive as possible. We're going to be inviting you to use the chat box to ask any questions to the speakers, which are going to be shared at the end of the session. We're going to try our best to answer all the questions as possible. We're also reminding everybody that the microphones are off and the session is being recorded as well. The handouts are actually, there's a link in the chat, and we're going to be posting that throughout the initial pieces here as well. And again, we want to welcome everybody to today's session. We also want to remind you that there's going to be a survey at the end of today's learning session, and we welcome any feedback, any information. We'll give you more information as we come to a close, but we are very excited to hear about any feedback or opportunities that you may think that you may need in the future as well. Next slide. During the past few months, we have come together on a journey of learning about the needs and joys of our immigrant students and families. And today is our last learning series of needs and joys of immigrant students, families, and community partners, expanding our mental health practice. So if you're here for the school mental health strategies to support newcomers, CBITS, and community circles, you have come to the right place, and welcome. Next slide. We also want to remind everybody that today's presentation is part of the Pacific Southwest MHTTC under a cooperative agreement with SAMHSA. Though the thoughts are supported by SAMHSA, these words are our own. So we just want to remind everybody about that. Next slide. We also want to remind everybody that this is a safe room. And in the case of any security issues that may occur, the session is going to be immediately ended and it's not going to resume. We're going to be sending you a separate email to be sent to all the participants with further instructions. And thank you again for making this learning space a safe room. Next slide. So this is the wonderful map of all the technology transfer centers, which are a total of 10 throughout the United States. And we are Pacific Southwest covers region 9, which is on the left-hand side. It's highlighted in green. And it's also, please visit the website to learn more about your center and all the resources available to you. The next slide talks about, or actually illustrates, all the different services available through the technology transfer centers, no cost training, technical assistance, and also resources available to your region as well. The next slide. MHTC network uses affirming, respectful, and recovery-oriented language in all of the activities that we provide. As you're thinking about reading this particular slide, I want you to think about which one resonates for you as you're entering today's learning session. For me, I'm going to be choosing a strength-based and hopeful, because we're going to be sharing some exciting supports that are available to newcomers in your school districts as well. So this is something that I'm going to be holding myself accountable to today. And as you're thinking about today's learning, pick one that resonates for you, okay? The next slide actually offers the same language, pero en español. So you can choose an English one or one in Spanish as well. So it's the same language as well, same affirming language. Next slide. Now that we got that out of the way, I know for those that have participated in session 1 and session 2, you've seen a team of presenters providing all of this wonderful information on the needs and joys of immigrant students and families. I want to, just thank all the team that, that was available to put this together. Claudia Rojas, Claudia Gonzalez, Alicia Lambula. I really want to thank you for all your time and commitment. And also, I cannot forget Olivia Rojas, who's our technology person behind the scenes. She's been so instrumental in putting this together as well. And I did forget to mention that if you have any technical issues or questions, you can directly message Livia Rojas, who can assist you, and she'll be happy to provide any support if you're needing some technical questions or issues that could come up. So thank you so much for joining us. And thank you, presenters, for your time and commitment to this important topic. Next slide. As we're embarking in our learning today, what we're hoping to get today is the looking at the objectives. The learning today is going to focus on building an understanding of the impact of mental health on newcomers, their relation to adapting to a new educational system. We're also going to be offering ideas and resources that will support their growth as well. We're also going to be exploring additional ways to support and enhance. So you're going to, leave this particular session with some practical tools and interventions that you can provide at your school sites to support newcomers. And lastly, we're going to be sharing best practices as well. Next slide. So this is the lay of the land for today, right? So this is our agenda, and we're going to do a very short review of session 1 and 2. We're also going to be defining the term newcomer. What does that mean? But we're also going to talk about, do a little bit of a review of the triple trauma and the mental health impact on newcomers. But we're also going to be discussing best practices to support and enhance the resiliency that our immigrant students already have within themselves as well. And we are so excited to be also sharing joys from the field. And we have a panel of students and also a teacher they're going to have a discussion with you to give you an opportunity to listen and learn from all of the ideas and supports that really help them to become successful academically as well. The next slide, it talks about illustrates basically, we're here today to discuss CBITS and community building circles. And we're also, even though today is the last learning session, we are also going to be extending an invitation for a community of practice. We initially had 4 dates scheduled, but as we were, reviewing the planning for this particular series, we also kept in mind that we're really embracing the work that we do as school leaders. So we want to make sure that we're taking care of you and your wellness. So what we decided to do is condense the 4 community of practices into 2 sessions. So these are the dates, and we're going to be putting this information in the chat so that you can actually, we're inviting you to connect with us on August 2nd and August 9th. You can just pick one or both learning sessions, and it's going to be such a great opportunity to come together and share best practices. Next slide. And finally, this is where you can actually access more information, more resources. MHCTC, not only did we collect some really great resources for working with immigrant students, but the MHCTC centers also provided some really fantastic resources as well. So you can get this information here. There's previous recordings, information, and also information about today's and previous sessions as well. All right, next slide. Thank you, everybody, for sharing where everybody is from. So I just want to kind of give a couple of shout outs to individuals. So we have Silvia Romero from Hesperia. We have people from Northern California, Louisville, Kentucky. Welcome. Thank you so much, Pomona, for joining us today. And then also Guam. Wow, we have individuals from all over. So it's so exciting to see everybody here. So thank you so much for putting that information in the chat. And so what we want to do now is we want to learn who's here. Maybe we also want to learn a little bit more about who's been, part of the other learning sessions. So that way we have a good idea in regards to the information that you received from the last 2 sessions as well. So in the chat, I want you to write in if you attended 1 or 2, the first or the second session or both sessions. You can just put either 1 or both in the chat. And in a second, the second part to this question is I'm going to be putting in a Menti link. And I want you to think about if you did attend any of the sessions before, using one word. what is one takeaway that you received from the last session? Okay. So we have a few that have participated in both. We have, some that participated in maybe one. Most of it has been both. Okay. Using one word, what is one takeaway from the last session? So I actually saw a couple of people putting in some information in there in the chat, and I saw the word hope. All right, so I see the word connection, hope, transfronteras, relationships, resiliency, action, healing, inspiring, collaboration, fronterismo, duality. These are great words. All right, so I'm going to give a couple of seconds so people can still vote, join. All right, thank you for participating in this Menti. And so as we're embarking today's journey, thank you, Livia. If we can just go back to the PowerPoint slide deck. We have, we've been discussing a really important topic, resources, and I love the word hope, right? So we look at resiliency as well. And so far, the purpose of us is really coming together, connecting, and really excited about today's learning as well. I have this quote here in this particular slide, and it says, "In the circle, we are all equal. No one's in front, no one is behind, no one is above, and no one is below. We are all related. Circles create unity." Wanted to start this off today because we are going to be talking about community building circles as a activity intervention to support newcomers. But I also wanted to, really create that community that we're creating here through the work that we do together. And so in community building circles, we have some particular norms. We already started off with the MHTTC norms, right? In the inviting language that we're going to be utilizing today. We're also going to be inviting us to really create that community, right? The community of support for each other as not only as learners as well, but also as providers in the field. And so in community building circles, we have norms, we have respecting the talking piece. Speaking from the heart is another one. Listen from the heart as well. Bring your best self, say just enough, and honor privacy. So today we are going to be utilizing all of these norms to introduce you to some really important information. I think the other piece too is we want to also acknowledge that you may hear some information that could be triggering for some individuals. We want to make sure that you take the time to also, if you do get triggered, you don't have the videos on, but just take the time and make sure that you acknowledge that information as well. So we want you to take care of yourselves. And so the next we're going to have Claudia Gonzalez give us a quick review of session 1.
There we go. Hi, thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you, Angela. All right, so let's talk a little bit about session 1. So what did we learn in session 1? So just really quickly, during the first session, we began our learning process through the terms related to our immigrant students, the policies that can impact and support students, and we learned about triple trauma, which is also something that we're going to learn and listen to a little bit more about today. We also learned how COVID-19 may have impacted the work that we do with our immigrant students. It also gifted us with the flexibility and the creativity to continue providing support to our immigrant students. And we also learned about the joys our immigrant students bring to our schools, their resiliency, their confidence, their autonomy, their sense of purpose, the greater self-works, and how resourceful they can be. So, just to kind of in a nutshell, this is a little bit of what we heard on session 1. I believe it is recorded, so you have access to listening and enjoying this session again if you'd like to learn a little bit more about session 1. And now I'm going to have Alicia talk a little bit more about what we learned in session 2. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I'm Alicia Rambola, school social worker here in South San Diego. Next slide, please. So in the last session, we discussed transborder students and what does this mean? So transborder students are typically students who are crossing the border either once a week or a couple of times a week to come to school in the United States. It typically happens in the border region. So for example, I'm in San Diego. This is a very common occurrence in this region. We also discussed certain policies that impact transborder students, such as the Ed Code, which is a huge determinant as to whether a student can openly and safely disclose that they are living in Mexico versus living in the United States. We also talked about the No Child Left Behind policy and how it impacts transborder students, since it means that they're placing resources in other communities. Also, Arizona's Prop 203, which it's still unfortunately in place, and no bilingual education is provided. We also discussed the impact of mental health on transborder students and how it impacts their interactions with family members, and also how similar they are to our dreamers and opportunities for collaboration across the border. Back to you, Angela. Thank you.
Thank you. I love the word that Claudia Gonzalez utilized, and she said gift, right? So I love the gifting. Thank you for that brief summary. And again, we invite you to go back to that particular slide that talks about all the different resources and listen to any of the previous sessions as well. And so as we're looking at today's session, for the purposes of today's learning, the term newcomers is going to be referred to we're going to refer to any foreign-born students and their families who have recently arrived in the United States. And that's the definition according to the US Department of Education, the Newcomer Toolkit, which is a fabulous resource guide. And we actually have linked it into the resources slide for you as well. Throughout, what we know is that throughout our country's history, people from around the world have immigrated to the United States to start a new life, bring in their customs, religions, and languages with them. And the United States is, to a great extent, a nation of immigrants. Newcomers play a very important role in weaving our nation's social and economic fabric. And U.S. schools play an important role in helping newcomers adapt and contribute as they integrate to the American society as well. Next slide. What we know, we're going to give a brief overview again, is that throughout the 21st century, we know immigrants to the United States have arrived from a variety of different countries. This particular slide illustrates the top 9 countries of origin for most represented among unaccompanied refugee minors. So you can see you have 9 countries that are highlighted here. And unaccompanied refugee minors come to the United States for a variety of different reasons, which we're going to talk about later on. Next slide. In most recent years, what we know is that unaccompanied minors are arriving from what is referred to as the Northern Triangle, which is Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras. And there's no single reason which drives unaccompanied children. There's a variety of different reasons, right? So there's a lot of push and pull factors that contribute to their arrival to the United States. It can include increasing territorial control by organized criminal armed groups. It could be domestic violence. It could be a direct threat and harm, or forcibly disappeared of murdered loved ones as well. Extortion, some families and students there's extortions that happen, also targeted for suspected or actual involvement in rival criminal gangs, threats by the police, the government, abuse. So there's a whole list of like push and pull factors. And also poverty and hunger could be another factor that contributes to the arrival to the United States. What we know in the next slide is that all of these different factors really impact the students and their families' mental health, right? Then the next slide, this is not an exhaustive list, but there is traumatic exposure that occurs pre-migration, during migration, and post-migration, which is also known as the triple trauma. We in session 1, we talked a little bit about this. And again, like I said, it's not an exhaustive list, but it gives you an idea of what children and families are exposed to during that migration journey. Children and families experience an array of trauma experiences during their country of origin, their migration to the United States. Some of the examples for pre-migration examples, this is, some of the lists, right? But, they could experience violence, again, like we talked about, students who come to the US, some of them have been threatened by the government or rival gangs. I remember I went to El Salvador a couple years ago to do a conference for a couple of different schools there on mental health. And I remember one story that one of the families talked about her fear every single day. And it's a real life fear that she constantly had to check in on her son because her fear was that the Mara Salvatrucha was going to take her son or kidnap her son. So she constantly lived with that fear. During the migration journey, another example is also, they experience long and dangerous journeys. They live in refugee camps as well. And also there's an experience that, some individuals go through, and it's called La Bestia, which is transportation for those that are not able to hire a coyote or a smuggler. In this particular, it's a train, basically a cargo train that goes through the direction of the north. And La Bestia is basically a train, and it's not a commuter train. It carries like materials and different things like that. So kids, families, they actually are on top of each of the train, and they could experience death. It's very dangerous. They do get extorted. Some families have also experienced being sexually assaulted while being on these trains. So that's, the experience that they go through during the migration journey as well. And also during the post-migration, the relocation, once they arrive to the United States, there's a detention process that occurs, and that detention process can vary for a lot of different individuals, right? But some of the experiences that they go through, it still can experience the detention camps, which are the detention centers, but also the camps. And some of the individuals experience, or they call it la hieleras, also known as the ice box. So, as you think about some families that are either crossing the border through the river, they're wet, they're cold, and they're put in these detention centers that are extremely cold with no blankets and no heat, and with the lights beaming pretty much 24/7. And so also until they're able to be transported or released to either for children, if there's a relative here, or placed in foster care. So that really kind of varies. And so there's a lot of other pieces that they experience throughout their migration journey. In the next slide, we think about some of the experiences that these students experience. The risk of PTSD due to their migration journey, their experience in their country of origin. So as school leaders, as school districts, what is the role? How is this impacting their learning, right? So we have to be cognizant about some of these factors, right? So we have the triple trauma experience. We also can have, thinking about the educational mobility of the student, also thinking about the educational experience in their country of origin. Language could also be a concern for the students, because not only are they coming into a new educational environment, but also the language is something that we have to think about as we're providing these support systems for our newcomer students as well. The other piece too is once they are relocated with families, and at times of, sometimes there's attendance concerns, right? So once they're placed in their, whether it's a caregiver, whether it's in foster care, depending on what the circumstances are, there could be some attendance concerns, right? So we're thinking about them adapting to a new environment. Some students, and I'll share a little bit of the story when I talk about the integration of CBITS. We had some students had chronic attendance issues because once they arrived to their caregiver or their home environment, they had adult responsibility. So they had a family obligation to support the family. So they started to work, and then school just became a secondary goal for them as well. And then again, thinking about the trauma experience as well. So looking at these pieces about the considerations whenever we're thinking about supports for newcomers as well. The next slide, how can schools support newcomer students? And so when we're thinking about, I mentioned the US Department of Education, the newcomer toolkit. They recommend 4 specific basic needs that students can thrive under if these are created within that school culture as well. So the first one is a welcoming environment. Second one, and we'll talk more specifically, like you're going to be able to think about, gather some ideas today as far as like what that welcoming environment looks like, right? So that newcomer toolkit has fascinating like trainings and like activities that you could do to create that welcoming environment. But it starts from from them stepping onto the campus where the individual comes in and says, I want to enroll in school. Like what support systems are available so that they're able to be to feel like they're welcome in that environment as well. The second one is the high quality academic programs to meet the academic and language development for newcomers. As we're thinking about the environment and the support, so we're thinking about the trauma, the exposure that they may have participated throughout their journey here. We also have to consider what their educational experience was in their country of origin. And we're also thinking about how long they were in those detention centers or the camps, and how much education did they receive during their time there. So all of that, taking into consideration, we have to make sure to create programs that are designed for meeting all of this particular needs for that particular student as well. The other recommendation is creating social emotional supports and skills developments to be successful in school and beyond, right? We know that kids are spending, before COVID, they were spending a lot of time in school, right? So as we're now transitioning into in-person learning, we know that the kids are spending a lot of time, right? So schools are the primary providers of mental health services, accessibility as well, right? So there's access to supports available on the campuses. So we're a really good place for students to be able to receive these resources also. The last one is encouragement and support to engage in the education process, right? So we're going to share some best practices in regards to how can students feel connected, but also when they're dealing with the frustration of learning a new language, material, skill level, how do we continue to encourage them to continue their educational journey, right? So it can be frustrating for learning new different new things, right? Cultural norms, educational systems, accessing services. So all those pieces really are connected as well. In the next slide, these are some of the ways that schools can provide trauma-informed and culturally responsive interventions. One of the pieces that we think about, as I mentioned earlier, most students are spending 7 hours plus in schools. Again, through the pandemic, it has shifted a little bit. As we go back, they're going to come back and reintegrate, right? But schools provide benefits because they are already on campus. So one of the pieces that we want to make sure is that we understand the barriers as to why newcomer students are not accessing services. Sometimes there might be a stigma connected to it, not only just academic, but also mental health, right? So looking at those aspects, why is there a stigma connected to accessing resources? Finances may also be a factor as well. So if there's a cost to some of the different clubs or activities on campus, are they going to be able to access these services as well? And at times there may be a lack of health coverage, right? So they may not qualify. And we're gonna talk a little bit again later on as far as like some resources available so that they're able to be supported despite of all of these different barriers, right? One of the things that we also want to emphasize as well, when you're integrating mental health supports on in schools, they're most effective, what we know, when they're offered when they're evidence-based. There is a fantastic article that we have linked into the reference page for you that talks about there's several evidence-based when it comes to mental health uh, interventions that have been very effective in working with immigrant students. And so one is for individuals, it's TFCBT, and then the other one is CBITS, which we're going to get into later on today. So that's the other piece too. So I put in right here again, one of the other aspects is that making sure that the provider, has trauma-informed experience as well. And again, please take a look at that article. It's such a fantastic article. I was really fascinated by reading that particular piece in regards to some of the different services that are out there that are research-based. Next slide. All right, that was a lot of information. So I want to take a little bit of time and have you think about a couple of different things. So there may have been some takeaways from the information that we have just provided here. You may be here with your team, or you are going to take this information back to your school sites. So as you're thinking about the 4 basic needs that the U.S. Department of Education Newcomer Toolkit recommends, I want you to think about which of the 4 basic recommendations does your school offer? Or are there any areas that maybe we need to revisit this? Like, oh, I have this information. Claudia Rojas is actually going to transition in next to talk to you about, what does this look like? How does this integration, these 4 basic areas, really look at in a school setting? So I want you to kind of start thinking about what are some ways that this information can be sent back to, taken back to your school site so that you can develop some of these particular aspects as well. And so that's part of the actual piece here. All right, so let me see if there's any questions in the chat. All right. Claudia Rojas is going to now share examples of her experience as a newcomer coach, and also offering some wonderful tips and ideas in how to meet some of these particular areas for supports for newcomers. Welcome, Claudia. Take it away.
Thank you, Angela. I really appreciate the information that you shared previously. And if we could advance to the next slide, please. So as Angela mentioned, one aspect that's critical when we support our newcomer students is to establish an orientation process for them. This definitely includes training our key staff, including office and/or counseling staff that have that first interaction with our students. And those staff members need to also know who to notify, who is the point person on campus that they need to connect that student with, the student who's enrolling. At my current school site, I'm fortunate to be that person due to my role. However, we acknowledge that most schools don't have a newcomer coach or counselor. So it's really important for the leadership team at the school site to designate somebody that will be that point person once our newcomer students enroll. And once that connection is made, that person, the designee, right, should be also the person that's connecting our students to extracurricular activities that are on campus, or any academic supports that are available. And we'll talk about those in our next slide. So this is really important that we need to ensure that when our newcomer students enrolled, that they are programmed correctly the minute that they enroll. In California, we use the LPAC, which is a language assessment that helps us to determine a student's level in English fluency. It's important to give those initial assessments so that we know where our students need to be placed. Once those assessments are completed, our newcomer students will receive English language development or ELD classes, both designated and integrated. The difference is that in designated classes, that's where our ELD standards will be focused on. So our students will really work on fluency, reading, writing, uh, speaking, and listening to English. And then in our integrated ELD classes, the ELD standards are woven into academic content such as math, science, social studies, etc. Additionally, newcomer students become part of our coaches or our counselors' caseload, or again, that designee that the school decides will be the person. Our students become part of their caseload so that individual plans can be created to support goal setting towards graduation. And it's also critical for our newcomer students to understand what academic interventions are in place at the school site, and also that they're not optional. And what I mean by this is, for example, this spring, as I was working with my newcomer students, I had conversations with each and every single one of them, making sure that they understand that they have to take summer school classes every single summer. And it's a hard conversation to have with students, especially right now during distance learning, right? And I can relate. Sometimes I feel like I'm zoomed out and, was thinking, oh, I'm gonna have the summer break to refresh, right? But for our newcomer students, it's so important for them to take the opportunities to have summer school classes or extended learning classes, right? So that we can be sure that they earn enough credits and fulfill their graduation and college admission requirements sooner than later. For example, in California, our newcomer students can remain enrolled until the age of 21. So this is in place if they need more time to meet those requirements. So it might vary from state to state, but that's definitely the case here in California. Some of our students may also qualify for AB 2121. If you have been at the previous sessions, you learned more about that. But just a reminder that this is made available so that our newcomer students can graduate with less credits. It's also important to remind our students that this is a great option, especially for our older students who may not meet the requirements by the age of 21, or just might feel that they want to get their high school diploma again sooner than later. So we have to remind them that if they do qualify for AB 2121 and take advantage of this, it does limit them to only being eligible for community colleges, since their A through G requirements would not be met under this option. And then when it comes to providing academic support to our newcomer students, some of these points might seem like common sense, right? As we look at this slide. However, we do have to be reminded of them frequently to make sure that our students don't fall through the cracks and that they're not misprogrammed. Some of our panelists later on will discuss this and how it affected their progress. So on the next slide, we're gonna discuss culturally responsive instruction. So my go-to resource when thinking about culturally responsive instruction is Zaretta Hammond's book, Culturally Responsive Teaching in the Brain. And I really appreciate the quote that you see that reads, "Cultural responsiveness is more of a process than a strategy. It begins when a teacher recognizes the cultural capital and tools students of color bring to the classroom. She is then able to respond to students' use of these cultural learning tools positively by noticing, naming, and affirming when students use them in the service of learning. The most common cultural tools for processing information utilize the brain's memory systems: music, repetition, metaphor, recitation, physical manipulation of content, and ritual. The teacher is responsive when she is able to mirror these ways of learning in her instruction using similar strategies to scaffold learning. So, at the school where I was a principal for 6 years, we took this to heart, especially when we thought about our newcomer students. And we created year-long projects for each grade level. So in the ninth grade, our students engage in a project where they dream of a healthier Los Angeles. In 10th grade, students participate in the Speak Your Truth project, where they use different art media to share their experiences as young people navigating different obstacles. As 11th graders, students select a topic of interest and write a research paper, excuse me. And finally, as seniors in the 12th grade, students engage in a soapbox activity in partnership with the MICFA Challenge, where they take on community issues that they then create campaigns for. At my current school, where I serve as the newcomer coach, our students work in partnership with Creating Creators, where they write monologues and dialogues based on their experiences. Then they act out their scripts and present them. All of these projects that I mentioned include students presenting to a group of industry panelists who then provide feedback. So culturally responsive instruction recognizes our newcomer students' cultural capital and ensures that they see themselves in their learning. And on the next slide, we're gonna see the importance of extracurricular activities and think about that. So a major aspect of developing our newcomer students and building their resilience is to encourage them to participate in extracurricular activities. This can be done through mentorship programs where recent newcomer students are paired up with older students. And one of our panelists will talk about the program that our school developed later in this presentation. And at my current school, our students participate in clubs that focus on language development, college readiness, and social emotional support. So it's also really important to encourage our students to join community organizations that work outside of school. And so again, like the projects that I mentioned earlier, that takes networking and building those partnerships with community orgs that come into our school and work directly with teachers and students. And so in return, we encourage our students to also go out and become engaged civically. And especially what we've seen is the organizations that support immigrant rights and fight for immigrant rights are a natural place for our newcomer students to participate in. And again, it's not limited to that, but this is where we focus our efforts. And then next, we're going to discuss how we provide support to our newcomer students by engaging them in restorative practices via community circles. So in 2013, not that long ago, my previous school received a grant to initiate restorative justice practices on our campus. All of our teachers and staff were trained, and they were asked to implement weekly community building circles in their advisory classes. And the students who you will meet on our panel today were part of these circles that took place. On the next slide, I will share some aspects to keep in mind when implementing community building circles. So the purpose of circles is to build community, provide safe spaces for our newcomer students so that they, again, can be oriented and learn about academic supports and the extracurricular activities that exist on campus. It's also important for as many adults as possible to participate in circles alongside our students, mainly because it's invaluable for them to see their mentors in a vulnerable space. This reminds me of the quote that Angela shared at the beginning of our presentation about everyone being in a shared space while in a circle. It evens out the conversations, the emotions that are shared. And having our students be in circle alongside us makes a tremendous impact. Having more than one adult in the circle will also help to gauge which students may need extra support. So it's a regular practice to be able to have, again, support staff. So if you're able to have, for example, your school social workers in circle with you, counselors, TAs, anyone who interacts on a regular basis with our students, again, it helps to build that community and to build that trust. Circles should happen as often as possible, but I really recommend weekly at minimum. And the topics, they can range from lighthearted icebreaker activities to more intense discussions. And of course, such discussions should only be done once teachers determine that our students feel safe to engage in those conversations. And on the next slide, you will read about what two of my current newcomer students shared after this semester of weekly community building circles. So before I share my students' reflections, I do want to make sure to point out that circles come from indigenous practices. Our ancestors used this circles as a method of communication. And as a Chicana educator, it is my passion and my responsibility to bring the teachings of our ancestors into our classrooms. Year after year, I have the privilege of witnessing how circles impact students, especially our newcomer students. So for example, on the slide, I shared Antonio and Kimberly's thoughts, the reflections, and both students demonstrated tremendous growth once they felt safe sharing about their experiences. Antonio, in particular, experienced some of that triple trauma that Angela shared with us earlier. And this was really impacting his attendance. He was rarely at school. And once we started circles, he rarely missed school. In fact, I haven't checked his exact numbers, but I feel like he came to school every single day after he started becoming comfortable with circles and then sharing in circles. And he really became a leader among our newcomer students. And then Kimberly, speaking of leaders, definitely shined among her peers because she was not afraid to share about the traumatic events that she has experienced in her life. At 17 years old, she has gone through some very, very difficult traumatic events. And what is most important and most remarkable about Kimberly is that not only is she comfortable sharing about those experiences, but more importantly, how she's overcoming them. And so other students, especially other young ladies in the circles, really have gained inspiration from Kimberly and are finding their own voice. And so again, acknowledging our students' Indigenous roots is critical in their growth and resiliency and helping them have that courage to share their experiences and their voices. So I'm now going to pass it on to Angela, who's going to share about another tool that we use to engage our newcomer students.
Thank you, Claudia, for offering these great resources, and they're practical and free. So I'm just very excited about that piece, but also about the power of the integration of these interventions and the stories that the students shared as the impact that it's had on them to be able to enhance their learning through the experience that they've had at their sites. So one of the next piece is we're going to talk about the transition into utilizing cognitive behavioral intervention for trauma in schools as an intervention. As I mentioned earlier in the beginning of the session, there are very few evidence-based practices that have documented success in working with newcomers and addressing trauma. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my experience as a school social worker at an urban school. In the next slide, I'm going to talk about just kind of the demographics and what this particular intervention did for these students. If you can go to the next slide, Livia. In my early experience as a direct school provider, I worked in an urban high school located in LA County as a school social worker. I was hired under, I'm gonna probably age myself, but under AB 1802 funds back then. This particular, it wasn't part of LA Unified. It's a high school district that is in the LA County area. And the makeup of the school consisted of 90% of the students were Hispanic, Latinx students, right? That's a big population, right? And out of those, there was a population of about 2,600 students at the high school level. And out of those students, 74% were economically disadvantaged, right? The rest, really comprised of a variety of different students. But there was about 9 to 12% newcomers at that particular high school. And it was one of the 2 high schools that offered newcomer supports for students. One of the pieces that, as I got hired as a school social worker specifically to address not just the newcomers, but just develop a mental health program at the site, it's one of the pieces that we were looking at the data is that the school noted a few things, right? One was they had newcomers had low attendance. Some dropped out of school to either return to their country of origin, or they had to work to help, with finances with the family. And also, we began to wonder what systems were in place and what systems needed to be enhanced so that we can address these particular concerns. Next slide. This is similar to what we did, with the data, with the information that we had. What we decided to do is this is kind of the strategy that we developed to address these concerns. And it's very similar to what Claudia Rojas was discussed about. It's very similar to those pieces. We immediately began to add these systems in place to address the enrollment and support their adjustment to a new school environment. At the beginning part of it is that the office staff was trained to notify students, notify the staff whenever a newcomer student was enrolling. So it started off from the initial contact at the front gate when the families were coming in to say, we're here to enroll. They asked a few questions and then they directed them. They actually walked them to the enrollment office and the guidance office to introduce them to the staff that was going to help them to enroll. And also then training began with the newcomer counselor, coach, teachers, the attendance counselor as well. Campus aides and administrators were all trained in this process. And as soon as they enrolled, we made sure that they meet with the newcomer enrollment individual and address all these different concerns to learn about the students. So there was like a questionnaire to learn about their previous schooling, current supports, current needs that they may be experiencing. It could be housing, a lot of different areas that we addressed during that initial interview. And also during that process, once they were able to connect, they were connected to the newcomer teacher who was in charge of addressing the testing, academics testing, and then also making sure that they were provided with the right resources for enrollment. And then they were, obviously at that point, the school counselor was able to match, the students to make sure that they were able to get into the right classes as well. The school counselors were also part of this, conversation. We also asked the students to, they learned about clubs on campuses, clubs and classes that were available, but we also involved the students part of this, exploration year, where what clubs would they want to have on campus that they didn't notice on the list of clubs. And so, some of the kids said, the students said, we would love to have a dance club here. And one of the school staff was actually a salsa instructor. So he created this magnificent salsa club. They also, dance other dances, bachata, cumbia. merengue. So the kids were actually, they had lessons, but they also, then it progressed to them having like not uniforms, but like outfits. And then they also participated in competitions throughout the district. So it just kind of became this really well-known dance club. So kids were actually really excited about that. And then also there was a development of mentoring programs that were gender specific. Mainly the reason was because one is that we had some students that may not have had their biological parents here in the U.S. And so, or maybe they were just living with their mom. And so there were very specific mentoring programs that were created. And one was for the girls. It was called Paths, which is preparing and training her for success. And then Meg, which is the one for boys, Men Achieving Greatness, were developed. And so kids participated in these clubs as well. The school counselor, once they met with the school counselor will link them to these different clubs, but also not just at the academic component as well, but also addressed any of the concerns, social emotional concerns. We did obtain consent at the beginning to make sure that the caregivers were supportive of the services that they were able to get. So everybody was trained to really have this really nice language about connecting and resources. So that was really helpful to engage the families during that time as well, because that was one of the other areas that we wanted to engage the caregivers. And so the intake included, I was a lead social worker there, and then we were able to have social work interns that provided the additional supports for the students. And so once they were referred to the Serenity Center, which is the wellness center at the site, the intake included introduction to the program, completion of a CBITS has a screener. So we just have to caution you, making sure that if you are going to implement this particular intervention, to make sure that it's approved by your school site. But it's a screener, which is, we'll talk a little bit about what the purpose of that was. That screener also gave us an idea whether CBITS was going to be a best fit for the student. So there's different points that it asks, and there's a score that takes place where we determine whether CBITS they would qualify for CBITS, or if the symptoms were too elevated, we were able to refer to our school-based mental health provider. We actually had an MOU, a memorandum of understanding, with a community mental health agency that was there 40 hours a week with 2 clinicians on the site for free at the site. And they provided services to indigent families. So whether they had insurance or not, they were able to get those services there as well. So that's in a nutshell. That's a lot of information. In the next slide, I'm going to talk a little bit about CBITS. I'm going to put in later on in the chat the link to getting more information. So CBITS stands for Cognitive Behavioral Intervention for Trauma in Schools. And this particular evidence-based practice is a skill-based group intervention. It was developed by using a community partner research model. We utilize this cognitive behavioral techniques, and it relieves depression, anxiety, post-traumatic symptoms exposed in children from ages 11 to 15. There is a younger version of this, and it's called Bounce Back. And in the link, that I'm going to be sharing, there's information about both particular programs. So it is a protocol that includes 3 individual sessions. There is 2 parent sessions, 1 teacher education session, and generally it's a 1-hour group, so it's very short and it's very skill-based. So you start off with the psychoeducation, teaching relaxation and coping skills first, because there is a trauma exposure and activity that you do, which is the 3 individual sessions. And so the concept and the reason why this is done this way is because we want to make sure that individuals are trained in their skills before, so that if they do get triggered with their trauma event or trauma exposure, they already have coping strategies, so those triggers or symptoms can actually be mitigated by using some of those interventions. And then once that happens, then they come back, right? So there's a 3 individual session, and they come back to the group and also continue to learn about the cognitive triangle and problem solving skills. And there's like a little celebration at the end. And we also integrate parent education. It's recommended for twice, but you can integrate it as much as you would like, but twice is the recommended treatment part of it. And there's also teacher education as well. So in that particular article, it talks also about the kind of the origin of CBITS, and it was originally evaluated by one randomized controlled trial in the Los Angeles Unified School District, and the second randomized controlled trial in New Orleans, and then it's been expanded to other areas as well. So that's like a kind of like a very short presentation about the CBITS process, right? The intervention. The next slide is very small to see, so it's like a test for your eyesight right now. But we're going to actually put this link in the site and in the chat, and it really talks about the logic model. So it just kind of goes over the problem, right? So the information of the traumatic stress and how that information is gained, and then it gives a very general overview of CBITS, kind of the information that I just gave you, and some of the outcomes that they actually discovered through these randomized trials that they provided. So it has some very significant success. And I'll share in the next slide the outcomes that we saw in our program as well. And so in this particular intervention was utilized for or provided for about 8 years. And so the success is that we saw a reduction in students returning to their country of origin. We also saw an increase in the students' motivation to continue their education. So part of the conversations we had, in some of the orientations that we have with the caregivers, we talked a little bit about CBITS, but we also talked about some of the resources and really supported the families as well. So we were able to get that information in, upfront to make sure that they were very successful in their academic journey with us during that time. And also, there was a huge increase in caregiver involvement. There are some homework assignments that the students are provided with that they have to talk to their families about some of that trauma, if it's safe to do so, of course. But there's a process with that. And so we saw a lot of caregiver involvement, really feeling students felt really supported, not only because they were teenagers as well, but they also felt like their caregivers really supported and understood their experience that they went through as well. And then also it gave us an opportunity to immediately link if additional support was needed for that particular individual. So we were very cautious about placing the students in the right support that they benefited from. It definitely was, even though it was part of the program, it was it was also voluntary as well. The really nice thing about this is that the teacher, it was so easy to implement because during the scheduling of the groups, we're part of their classroom. So the nice thing is that because it was even in odd days, we were able to alternate. So they were not missing the entire class time. It was actually integrated into the learning as well. So that was a nice piece too. And the teachers highly recommended for the students to participate, and they did not want to let their teachers down. So they were very involved. And so that was really nice to see. We also saw there's a pre and post screener. So you have to do the screener twice. And we saw a huge symptom reduction in the reporting of the symptoms for the students as well. I mean, I think the other piece too is that students, you really saw the difference in the kids. They love to connect with each other. The other piece too that we saw a lot is that they were able to know that other students had the same experience and really reduce that stigma, and also being able to share freely in a safe environment that, the experience that they had as well. But it also created that space for networking, because We did experience a lot of students having to isolate themselves because they didn't feel connected, but this was a form of connection for them. So we're going to talk about Joyce from the field. So Claudia Rojas, take it away.
Thank you, Angela. And actually, I did have a question that came directly to me. Is it okay if I answer it?
Absolutely, yes.
So one of the questions was for CBITS, if you're a teacher, are you able to implement the program? And the answer is actually no, because it does need to be implemented by somebody who has the clinical background and education. However, there is a program that teachers can use. It's called SET. It stands for Support for Students Exposed to Trauma. And it was designed, it's an adaptation of CBITS.
Yes.
That teachers and those who do not have the clinical background can use. So I did want to point that out. I can put the link to the website. Oh, thank you, Angela, in the chat. So you can definitely take advantage of that. I've used that before as well with students, so it's great. All right, so moving forward with, sorry, hold on. Here we go. Okay, so for our final presentation here, we felt that it would be a wonderful opportunity to learn and listen to our newcomer students and their teacher. And we're going to have a discussion with our panelists, and we're focusing on these two questions. What supports help the most in their success? And how can schools ensure that support is available for newcomer students? Each panelist will have 1 minute to answer each question. And while we listen, please write any questions that you may have for the panelists in the chat box. And on the next slide, I'm going to introduce our panelists. So it is my great pleasure and honor to introduce you to our panelists, who I met when I was a principal at the Community Health Advocate School, also known as CHAZ, located in South Central Los Angeles. Josue, Panchito, and Susana were students at CHAZ, and Ashley and I worked side by side in supporting them. It's also important for you to know that our students are also first cousins who come from a tight-knit family. So first I'm going to introduce Josue. Josue Cruz is a student at Cal State Polytechnic University, Pomona. He's majoring in computer science, and his dream is to become a web developer. He came to the US in 2016 and was placed in the 9th grade at the age of 16. He learned the English language in 9 months, thanks to the great resources that were available at our school. And Josue wants to be a hardworking person just like his mom. She is his biggest inspiration and the reason that he has not given up despite the obstacles that come his way. Susana Acosta is the first generation in her family to attend college. Currently, she is working on her bachelor's degree in biology at Cal State University, Los Angeles. After earning her BA, she intends to continue her studies and apply to medical school. Susana was born in El Salvador and attended her first year of high school there. In 2017, she moved to the US and attended a different high school before enrolling at CHAZ. I'm so proud to say that she graduated as a salutatorian from CHAZ in 2020 at the age of 19. As a newcomer student, she was able to complete her studies and continue on with higher education. Francisco, or better known as Panchito Lopez, is a student at Cal State University Dominguez Hills, also majoring in computer science. He was born in El Salvador and came to the United States in 2016 at the age of 16. When he first arrived, he enrolled at a high school where there was little support to learn English. After a year, he enrolled at CHAZ, where our career pathway was focused on mental and behavioral health. Panchito met people at CHAZ that helped him to learn English and succeed in life. Now he has completed his first year of college and looks forward to graduating so that he can feel proud of himself and prove to his family that he came to the United States for a reason. Ashley Englander has been an educator in Los Angeles Unified School District for 15 years. During that time, she has worked as a teacher, assistant principal, and instructional coach. She currently supports teachers in creating classrooms where language and literacy thrive, and where diverse learners have a sense of voice and agency. Ashley is committed to creating schools where newcomers and English learners have the social, emotional, and academic supports they need to forge an empowered course in secondary education and beyond. So let's go ahead and begin our discussion. And we're actually going to start with Panchito. So Panchito, if you could please share with us what supports helped the most in your success as a newcomer student?
Hi everyone. Yeah, my first support was that when I came to the United States, my mom told me to read a kindergarten book so that I was able to learn the basic of English. And after that, I went to high school for the first time, and I was not able to communicate with the teachers because they were all from Russia and they were just talking in English. So yeah, that was a little bit of help. And I transferred to CHAS. And when I transferred to CHAS, there were like many programs. Everybody was able to speak Spanish, so I was able to understand the programs, what they were about. And yeah.
Thank you so much, Panchito, for sharing. Next, we'll hear from Susana. And again, Susana, what supports helped the most in your success as a newcomer student?
The supports that helped me to succeed was, I remember my ELD3 class. My teacher, she used to put us in a discussion, and that helped me to improve my English speaking skills because I was afraid of my accent and all that, and that helped me to gain the confidence. Also, I remember the one teacher, she used to give us books to read, and after reading those books we have to take quizzes to gain points. That was a great. It wasn't voluntary, but that helped me to understand and take inference while I was reading.
Thank you so much, Susana, for your reflections. And next, let's hear from Josue. Josue, what supports helped the most in your success?
Yeah, I think there were a lot of things that were provided by CHAS that helped me really to learn the English language. For example, I heard when Ms. Rojas was talking about the community circles, the projects, and all of that, it was just flashing back because I was part of all those things. And I remember in my senior year, we did we target a community issue, and I was part of one of the teams that actually had to go to the what's it called to downtown and actually talk about to representatives about my topic. And I feel like that all of the resources that were provided, everything helped me to become the person I am and to be confident to speak the language, and it has transported to my college experience because I'm doing computer science, and that's more languages that I have to learn. But since my English is really good, I think it has really shaped my confidence, and yeah, that's why I'm doing good, and I'm really grateful with CHAS.
Thank you so much, Josue. And next we will hear from Ashley, who will summarize what our students said and add some insight of her own. So Ashley, if you could speak to what supports help most in the success of our newcomer students.
So I think our newcomers are speaking to the importance of teachers knowing them well enough to be able to really push them with support, and also a sense of feeling like socially connected. So I think 2 examples I can share from Hawkins, or I worked for all 3 schools at Hawkins, about how we did that, but particularly in CHAS is one is, as Angela already mentioned, just being very thoughtful and intentional about our intake process and how we learn as much about our students, their interests, their talents, and also their academic backgrounds, so that we can personalize and provide them resources that are really going to meet their individual needs. The second is using our advisory space as an intentional place to develop some of that navigational capital where our students can learn about what opportunities exist, learn about how to take full advantage of the resources. And then the third is the newcomer mentoring that Claudia mentioned earlier. we were lucky to work with Thalma Schultz, who's actually, I think, a participant today or attendee. And she at the time worked for the Center for Powerful Public Schools and helped us develop a newcomer mentoring program where our 4th year students were able to welcome and mentor our recently arriving students. They went through a 3-day training that was really rooted in the community cultural wealth theory. And then they acted as mentors for our brand new arrivals who could really see, like, here's what it looks like in 3 or 4 years. And with full support, you can be here too.
Thank you so much, Ashley. So moving on to our next question. Again, we'll start with Panchito. Panchito, how can schools ensure that support is available for newcomers?
I will say that when the newcomers are going for the first time to high school, I think it would be a good idea to let them know what type of programs they have in the school. Like, for example, we have this program so you can learn more English, or we have this other program so you can get involved in the school, so they can be able to communicate with students and practice the English.
Thank you, Panchito. Next, we're going to hear from Susana. So Susana, how can schools ensure that support is available for newcomer students?
I agree with Panchito. I think it's important that communication, that the student feel connected with the school, and because it's a new transition and the school that they had in their country, like the school system is not similar to this one in the US. I think it is important for them to understand how everything works, like how many requirements they need to take and how different classes and options they have, for example, like for their AP classes or selected classes. And I think that's important. And also to include their parents, because sometimes that gap is important for their learning and their success in school.
Thank you, Susana. And I wanted to add too, I remember you said that when you first arrived, people kept saying, go to your counselor, go to your counselor. And you said, what is a counselor? Who is a counselor, right? So that reminds me of what you just said in terms of understanding the differences in the school systems, right? Thank you. And next we'll hear from Josue. So Josue, if you could share with us, how can schools ensure that support is available for newcomer students?
Yeah, I do agree both Susana and Panchito. They really need to encourage students to join the events, not only let them know, but also encourage them to be like, okay, if you join this, it's gonna help you with this. And because in my for my point of view, I was invited to a lot of things that I thought I was not gonna be able to join because I didn't know the language that much. But once I got into one of the things, like for example, mentorship, I actually felt like I could do it because they made me feel, they trained me, they prepared me, and when I actually did it, I actually made a huge inspiration. I was an inspiration to another student who was born here in the United States. So also, last thing would be train staff and have them committed to help the newcomer students, because they need to understand that they're not in the same position as people who were born here, but to understand their situations. And yeah, pretty much that's really what they should do to keep encouraging.
Thank you so much, Josue. And again, we'll hear from Ashley, who will summarize our students' thoughts and provide some insight.
Yeah, you all said it all. I think to just build on what you said around the importance of staff being trained and family being connected with, we hire teaching assistants who play a really important role, and we're really intentional about making sure that they're kind of another layer of mentoring for students. And then also, again, making sure that those advisory teachers are really well equipped to both advocate for newcomers and teach the self-advocacy in that space. And I think we are lucky to have some teachers who are really passionate about being those newcomer advisors for 9th and 10th grade years, and to connect with families in that space as well.
Thank you, Ashley. And I want to thank each of you for sharing such powerful reflections about support for newcomer students. I'm so proud of each of you, and I'm so grateful that we can continue this journey together. And next, I will pass it on to Angela, who will take questions from the audience.
Yeah, I don't see any questions, but we welcome any questions from the participants. I do have a question that we do have a backup question for the panelists. How have the supports helped you now? So, you talked about the experiences during high school, but how, now that you're in college, what are some things that are helpful for you, that the supports have helped for you to be successful in college? So we'll start with Panchito.
Yeah, so one of the things I think it will be that I keep practicing with my cousins English, even though that I have been asking to many people, do you think my English is good? Do I think I sound good? And they're like, yes, you sound good. You sound better than when you came. And I keep on practicing English, and also because I'm in computer science, and like Josue says, it's another language. So basically I'm gonna be learning like 3 languages. So yeah, even though you know a little bit more about English, you have to keep learning and learning so you can be a better person.
Thank you. I think Susana was next.
So for me, what helped me, like I was saying, reading the books and taking quizzes that helped me, because here at college we need to do essays that are like 5 to 6 pages long, and that really helped me. That helped me to gain vocabulary, to learn new words, and how to transition from paragraph to paragraphs, and how not to sound repetitive when I'm expressing my ideas. And also, I lost the fear of speaking in public. I used to isolate myself. I was always in any classes, just paying attention and being there by myself. And then after I joined clubs and I created networks at high school, that helped me to gain confidence and don't feel afraid to ask a question, even though we're through Zoom, which is even harder. But that helped me to gain confidence and not to be afraid of my accent, and to understand that everyone is learning, that I'm not the only one that is going to be wrong sometimes.
Thank you, Susana. Josue?
Yeah, what I could say is that it's been like 4 years since I graduated high school, but these past 4 years that I've been in college, it has just been amazing how well I have developed in this new environment since the beginning, because Chaz really did a great job into prepare me for that next step in life. I wouldn't say I had to practice more English, and not that saying that I know 100% English, but I'm so confident that I can have a conversation with anybody, and I know it's just gonna be fluent and it's gonna go the way it's gonna go, because I'm just, I don't know, I feel like they really gave me like a superpower, because I feel like I can do anything now. I know a lot of languages in computer, and that's just amazing how well I've been doing in these past 4 years in college, and networking, talking to my professors, tutoring, all that stuff I have been doing, and that's thanks to all the effort that Chaz, and how committed they were to help me and other students.
Thank you. One of the words that I hear from the 3 of you is again, going back to that resiliency, but also just the strength. I know that there's comments in the chat about just like your strength, right? So you're very encouraging. And I know now, I know, Jose, you have mentioned before that you help other students to connect to those resources as well. So we have a few questions. We have time for a couple more. So one of the questions is, what does mental health mean to you? We can go back to Panchito if you like. So what does mental health mean to you?
for me, mental health is not just by being able to help just one person and make them feel that um, they're not alone, you know, because sometimes I used to have a friend that he was he was good in English, but he told me, I'm afraid of go outside and speak with somebody that can't really speak English. And I just told him like, no, it doesn't matter if you're afraid, don't feel afraid. Just go and try your best. Because if you know that you know how to speak English, just go and try your best. They're not gonna judge you because you're gonna say a wrong word, you know. And by saying that, he thanked me after that. And then now I was talking to him, and then he told me thank you
Mm,
for the example that you gave me. And now I'm able to speak with whatever persons come in the front, and then I'm able to have a conversation with any
mhm.
person.
It's about normalizing it, right? Making it
Yes.
normal. Good. Thank you. Susanna, what does mental health mean to you?
For me, is understanding that everything matters. That not only passing grades and taking all the classes, but also to taking time to yourself and understand that that there are different kind of situations, and also understanding how we feel like understanding ourselves, and to know that sometimes we're not gonna feel like we are like at that 100%. That sometimes we're going to feel lost and like feel like we're not gonna have that strength to continue forward. But it is also important to understand that we are learning and this is a process, and also how to seek help and how to take time for ourselves and to relieve all that stress. And especially in this pandemic, because this was a big hit for everyone, was a new environment, even for teachers and students. And it is important to understand that we can take time to ourselves to heal and not to push ourselves to the limit because we want to have good grades. But it's important to understand that our mental health matters, how we feel matters, how our body is reacting to all this pressure.
Mhm. Thank you, Susanna. Josue, what does mental health mean to you?
Yeah, I feel like they said it all, but it's basically understanding that uh, making a positive change, but also knowing that you can't do it alone and you have to rely on everything on your surroundings, what's available. I know you mentioned I talked to you about somebody that I'm helping, which is Josue, my friend
Mm,
from high school. Uh, he's been here in the United States for plus 10 years, and he's still struggling with the English language. And I remember once he told me, hey, I think I'm gonna drop out because I don't understand this. I don't know how to do it. And I was like, no, you should. Let me help you. Let me help you what you need. Send me your work, but I'm not gonna do the work for you. But also send me your work, and I help you with that. And yeah, to the present, he's still in college, and I'm still receiving messages from him.
mhm,
Uh, saying thank you for not letting me drop out, for helping me, for really put me like place me in the path in the right path. And I helped him how to seek for help in college, how to navigate there, how to work with his assignments. And yeah, that's all that I'm sharing with him is what I got from
mm.
my previous high school and from all the experiences that I've been gaining throughout my college experience.
That's great. So all of you have been able to just connect with other students that have been in the same experience that you had. So we have a lot of great questions in the chat, but there's one final one. What advice would you give other newcomer students? Antito?
The advice I think it would be um, to don't be shy,
Mm,
because I know it's hard, and you get nervous when you're about to talk in English, but just don't be shy and try, just put it in this way. Like, think that with the person that you're gonna be talking in English, just pretend that you know that person like for many years. Just pretend that, and you're gonna be good. Because when I used to have a presentation, they told me, okay, so the presentation is gonna be in English. I'm like, oh my God. And I got nervous. And then when I was in the front with all my friends, I was thinking of, okay, but these are my friends and I'm gonna be good. So just let's go. Let's do it. And I did it. And when I started doing that every single project, I was going good with the English, and now I'm not shy, and I'm not afraid of saying a word that is not how it's supposed to say it, but I'm always going for it.
Thank you, Panchito. Susana, what advice would you give to other newcomer students?
I would say like to understand that this is a process that you're gonna get through. That even though you feel lost at this time, you're gonna learn it because it takes time. It's not going to happen from today to tomorrow. And it is important to don't feel frustrated if you don't understand it right away, but you're gonna get it because it is, like I said, it's a process. And if you continue like practicing and keeping your effort and putting all your intention to it, you're gonna be able to learn. And it's like school, like you don't get a subject right away. That's why you have like a whole semester for one class or even a year. And that's like how it is. Like we're gonna get through this we're going to feel comfortable in this new environment. It is important to understand that it's a process of learning.
Thank you, Susana. Josue?
Yeah, it is a process, and it's not going to be easy. There's no shortcuts, and I would tell them not to give up after the first time they fall, because there's going to be many of those times, and it's going to depend on the person whether he's going to stop there or he's going to keep going. Also, it's going to depend on how well he's being taught in high school. So I would just tell him to believe in himself, because the fact that they are here and they went all through the challenges and obstacles, like we know the mentioned the Bestia, all the cartels that are in Mexico, just the fact that they have made it here to the US, like do not waste the opportunity that you are given, because you're still young and you still can make something for yourself, and for you can create a better future for you and your family. Like, just do not waste this opportunity.
Thank you for that, the messages that you just provided. I think, in a nutshell, like, we started off with this conversation about building a community, and we're going to end it with building that community as well. So your strength, your resiliency, your hope really has created that opportunity for the creation of community, not only just at Chaz, but also, you're sharing your experience with other people throughout the country. So everybody, I'm going to share some of the things that people have said in the chat. They've said, I admire your strength and resilience. You are inspiring in so many ways. Somebody feels for us. I'm taking a Spanish course and I feel lost, so I know how you feel. Thank you so much for sharing your experience with all of us, Panchito, Susana, and Josue. I'm so excited for you. Can't wait to see what you will be able to achieve in the future. Very, very exciting information. So inspirational. Good for you, Panchito. Thank you, Claudia, for welcoming your students to this conversation, to Ashley for supporting the panel, and for Angela for my moderation. Big thank you to Susan, Panchito, and Josue for being brave and vulnerable, for us, so that we can better ourselves and support our students that we provide. So thank you all for sharing your experience, points. You're an inspiration. I could keep going on and on, so powerful to hear from former students about mental health and how they managed the first years. They're going to be sharing this information in Kentucky. So sharing your stories as well. Resilience, si se puede. Again, thank you so much for the voice. With gratitude and appreciation, you're very authentic and wise for your age, right? So very inspired with your positivity. So I can keep showering you for your strength. So thank you so much for, connecting us with that information. So thank you so much for your participation. All right, so now we're going to be, wrapping this up, as far as the some of the pieces that we shared today. Again, like I said, we started off with building this community. We started off the needs and joys in our first session about discussing just information about supports with our immigrant students and their families. And so as we're wrapping up today's conversation, we have what are some action steps, right? So takeaways from today's session. And so as you're thinking about this process, I want you to kind of jot down some notes or ideas, how we have 2 questions for you. What needs and joys do our immigrant students have that can help them be successful students in the United States? When I think about and hear about Francisco, Susana, Josue, and Ashley as well, the information that I kind of think about is, the resiliency, the ganas, the strength that they bring in. I know they've all experienced different challenges, but part of this is like, what insights did you gain from the panel discussion, right? So as we're thinking about these ideas, these are some thoughts, right? So we provided you with a lot of different interventions and resources, going back to those 4 areas of supports for the newcomer toolkit, like the recommendations. These are additional tools that you can utilize in your school sites. So some individuals wrote, so imagination, creativity, strength, and hope. That's what we're looking at in these particular insights that we gain for this. And the joys that, we think about in working with our immigrant population as well. And again, the importance of cultural awareness is a must for student success. Thank you for pointing that out, Jacqueline. That's really important for us to really have that knowledge and, just firsthand experience from the students and what they're teaching us as adults to be able to create better systems for students so they can succeed. Next slide. The other questions too, is being able to think about all of these conversations, like I said earlier, what needs and joys do our immigrant students have? And again, going back to their stories is, the strength that they bring into their pieces. What Josue mentioned was not, and even Panchito also, not to be afraid, right? Our students are definitely human, not just what they went through, when they see them as a whole, right? So we want to make sure that we understand those aspects. Thank you for sharing that in the chat. Also, thinking about the next steps for you as you are wrapping up this information. We do have the community practice coming up in August, but what do you think? What are your thoughts about how your school district might try to do or do differently to ensure that immigrant students succeed? So these are some aspects as well to think about as you're creating and coordinating some resources for your school sites. All of the resources that we provided are free, like SET. CBITS is a free training as well. And you can actually download the curriculum from the website as well. And then also the training is available for that. And they are also available for upscaling and training the clinical staff to be able to provide and sustain these interventions at the school site. So those are at cost, but if you want to do the initial training, those are free on their website as well. And as we wrap up again, the next slide, even though we had just wrapped up the 3 series of working with immigrant students and enhancing our mental health, we are inviting you to continue the learning experience and really invite you to join us in the community of practice that's coming up August 2nd and 9th. I know for those that join in a little bit later, I talked about We initially had some sessions lined up for July. And, as we were developing the content and the information for this particular community of practice, we also thought about making sure that we're supporting our schools. I know there's so much information out there. So we condensed the dates, and we're offering these supports August 2nd and 9th. Please join us, and we're going to put the information in the chat so that you can register for those. If you did sign up for the July ones, we welcome you to enroll into the August 2nd and the 9th conversations that we will have. In the next slide, these are some upcoming events that we're going to be offering June 25th. There is a mental health impact of surviving COVID, implications for school mental health systems and leaders, and also Wellness Wednesdays. The last one for this year will be August 11th. We also will be placing another really fabulous training that we became informed about today, apoyando la salud mental de nuestras comunidades en proceso de deportación y detención, supporting the mental health of our communities in detention and deportation proceedings. And that particular one is going to be, also there's a translation services available if that is needed for you as well. So this is a fantastic training that's coming up. I know some of you had requested some of this information as well. The next slide. If you have missed any previous webinar, again, here's the link to any of the previous webinars. I know some of you only participated today, or you can always go back to reviewing some of the information for session 1 and session 2 as well. Thank you, Olivia, for putting that information in the chat as well. And I know some of you had asked about a certificate of completion. And again, email Olivia Rojas, and her email is listed here to report your participation as well. And that's your certificate of education hours. And the last slide, here's some information again about CEUs or CEs again. The last slide, we really want to thank you so much for participating in our series today. Learning experience was such a fantastic opportunity to be able to share with you resources, outcomes. But I think the best part is the panelists. They were able to share their experience with us and helping us become more skilled and better attuned to supporting our students as well. Again, thank you for participating. We are always looking for ways to improve our learning events and resources to provide the best support for you. And we'd love to hear about topics for future events you like to explore and ways to make our learning events even better. And at the start of the survey, you're going to be asked to create a memorable personal code. This code is necessary for you to input to be counted towards the goal required by our funder. And you are welcome to create your 4-digit code with any 2-letter and 2-number values that you wish. Just be sure to make sure that it's easy to remember. I know with me, I have so many passwords and I just get lost. But those questions are only going to take 5 minutes to complete. And please, we hope that you will share your thoughts with us. We are very excited to be able to offer additional services and opportunities for you. And then the last few slides, we just have the information as far as the resources that we talked about today. But we really want to thank you so much for taking the time out for you to participate in all of you coming to sessions 1, 2, and 3. Thank you again, Alisa, Claudia, and the panelists, and also the team that provided the coordination of all of this. So excited that you were here. So thank you so much, and we hope that you enjoy the rest of your evening.